this beauty process is a journey, but it's already because you're beautiful that you're able to start this journey, and you have to acknowledge that for yourself.
We don't give ourselves the credit that we need to. And so a lot of times the work that I do with people is helping them see that. And when we can see what our own core values are and we see how to honor them, we know how to set boundaries. We know how to stand up for ourselves and say, this is who I am and I am good. And I am not interested in being something else for anybody else. Yes. But I also want to live that in a gracious way, because grace is always more beautiful. Kindness is always more beautiful. Pretty is as pretty does.
It's as pretty does to others, but also how pretty does to yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? And this is a journey not for others' approval, but for yourself.
You Are Beautiful, podcast with J. Kim, ND.
Welcome to the You Are Beautiful podcast with J. Kim, MD. I'm your host, Dr. J. Kim. I'm a facial plastic surgeon, and I'm on a mission to make the world a more beautiful place, starting with you. Let's get into today's episode. The 3 core tenets of my podcast are that you are beautiful, you are unique, and you are worth it. Today's guest, I'm very excited to have her, has been through journeys of life, and she has come to embrace tenets such as these to live her best life. Miss Andrea Johnson is a coach, an entrepreneur, a visionary. Andrea Johnson resides in Virginia, and she empowers executives and founders to lead authentically with conviction and with confidence. By helping to uncover their core values, Andrea enables her clients to become impactful leaders. Her passion is to equip female leaders by defining a new culture to trust their own ability to think critically, create imaginatively, and lead effectively. Andrea, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh, thank you, Jay. I'm excited to be here. I love talking about beauty. It is one of my core values from the very first time I even started looking at core values about 30 years ago.
So, Andrea, let's talk about what core values mean for you in your life journey, and also for your clients as you help them through theirs.
Sure. There's a lot of talk about core values out there right now. And most of the people talking about them, I think, are talking about what I would just call values or principles that you live by. Most of them are also talking about values in a business sense, and a business can have core values. These are things that we move toward. It's more like a mission and a vision. Whereas for humans, for us individual people, these are, I think, much more personal. They are something you are born with. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. But they're the principles and priorities that guide your actions. They represent those foundational convictions that allow you to navigate complex situations, all the winds and waves and earthquakes of your life, while keeping your identity and authority at the forefront. Simply put, these are the non-negotiables in your life. They are the things that, the line that you don't allow anybody to cross if you don't honor them. Because I don't talk about aligning with our core values. We need to honor our core values. Maybe that's my Asian upbringing, but I don't think that aligning we do with something outside of us. So you might want to see if you can align with your business core values or your employer's core values. But when I talk about taking care of the core values in you, I'm talking about honoring them, finding a way to be in a situation where both you and the person you're with or the organization you're with can be honored at the same time.
What I'm hearing about core values versus other values that we talk about in business or other aspects of life is that it's something inherent. And it's not something that you made up and you want to conform to that sense. It's already within you, and it's something that you can't really change, it seems like. You have to, like you said, honor it.
Yeah. And, whenever I start a workshop, because I do these workshops with, like I even do them at the chamber and that kind of thing in their leader lab, I start the workshop with telling them that core values are internal. You use the word inherent. They have been there from the beginning. If you look all the way back to the time that I was 2 years old and my mother said I was the strong definition of a strong-willed child, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, freedom is my top core value looking back. So you were trying to tell me what to do and I just didn't like that, But it's actually very important to look back and see how throughout my life, like I said, I'm 57, about to be 58, and I can look back through my life and see where I abdicated or allowed my core values to be dishonored in different situations. And when people understand that that's the way it works, I'll start off a workshop and I'll say, if you tell me that your core values are faith, family, and country, I'm going to push back and we're going to start over. And anybody that works with me one-on-one starts off with this process of brain dumping. They think they know, some of them come in with, they think they know what their core values are. But then we get through our first session and they're like, oh my gosh, I have to start all over. Because we're not taught, Jay, to look inside. We are taught to look out here and to make cognitive decisions. I'm a thinker, right? I love thinking, but the reality is some things just are. And these are the things that just are. So when I say 100% of my clients come to me thinking they know their core values, what percentage of them do you think actually know their core values? How many of them are right?
My guess is about 5%. Zero. Okay.
Zero. They might know one. And I'll put it this way. A lot of people will live honoring at least one. I like to talk about primary core values, like maybe your top 3 to 5, because they are in some kind of a hierarchy. And a lot of times the ones that are really important to us, for some people, they are interchangeable at the top. But then we have secondary core values, things that are just important, but we're not going to break a relationship over them, or we're not going to walk away from something over them. But those top ones, when you start dishonoring those, that's when you start getting into things that are problems. I don't know if I shared this with you, but part of my journey includes bulimia and depression. Right. And as I look back in my life and I see how I allowed my core values to be dishonored because I wanted so bad to fit in, right? We want to belong because belonging is one of my core values. So in order to honor that core value, I allowed others to be dishonored. The authenticity and the freedom, I allowed those to be dishonored. And that pushed me from the age of 10 into bulimia and depression. And I put myself in the hospital. I turned 21 in a 12-week inpatient program. So when I can talk about it with a smile now, but it was no joke then. It's been a long journey of being willing to understand myself and to say, I need to be willing to put my non-negotiables first. Yeah. That's how we are magnetic with others. That's how we are authentic with others.
Well, I appreciate your being vulnerable about that really tough chapter of your life, being kind of stuck in this pit of an eating disorder and a mood disorder. And they often go hand in hand, of course. Can you tell me about the process of turning that around? And I know it was not an easy process. It was not an instant process. So can you tell me about that mindset shift and eventually your physical body coming around to that?
Yeah. So I was not, at the time we had bulimic and bulimorexic. I was a binger. I would I was in college and I would shut the curtains and turn the lights off and sit in my big flannel nightgown and eat all day long. And, but it was the only way I knew to soothe. And I developed those soothing techniques as a child where my family moved to Seoul, Korea when I was 7 and they were missionaries and we went to international school and it was just a very different culture. And especially in 1974. So very different. And, I look back on it now and I see, wow, I really missed some of the blessing of, I do appreciate the blessing of growing up internationally and always being presented with a different culture so that I don't only have the perspective of my own culture, but the only way I knew how to handle that, because my parents did the best they could with what they had. We all do that, right? And that's how we have to give ourselves grace. is that I started sneaking food when I was 10. And, at the time, now Korea is this amazing technological powerhouse, and it's extremely modern. And, I wish all of our houses had the little security things that seems like all the Korean doors have on them with keyless entry and all that stuff. But, and I wish everybody recycled like they did there. But,
they're militant
but at
about
the time,
that.
it was kind of, yeah, they're really good about it. But their culture is also very different. It's not an individualistic culture.
Yes.
I'm not telling you something you don't know, but it's very much about the whole. It's very much about, and there's honor involved. But for me, being in that totally different culture, I just couldn't handle it. And my dad being gone a lot because he was a missionary. And this was in the 70s. And a lot happened in Korea in the 70s. And a lot of scary things happened in Korea in the 70s. Yes. And almost every time something big went down at the DMZ, we lived in southwest Seoul or western Seoul. And on our mountain, they had anti-aircraft guns. We watched American helicopters get shot down. These were just things that I didn't know how to process. And so that's what I did. But being willing to put myself in the hospital and that was the first time somebody said to me, you actually have more control than you think. You actually can take care of yourself and help yourself feel safe in ways that don't include sneaking food or eating food. So that was when I was 21. So that's, 35. I don't do math. 35 some odd years ago. But it really, it included years of counseling and years of psychotherapy and years of personal determination to grow. Determination, never going back there. Body-wise, I did end up having gastric bypass nearly 19 years ago because I did kind of go back there. Right around 99, 2000, there was a lot that was happening in my family, with my grandfather who committed suicide, and my husband was a pastor of a church. It was just, everybody has stuff like this, Jay, but we don't talk about it. And then when we start to tell our stories, we realize, oh my gosh, that was really hard. But my mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. And I was at the time working at Johns Hopkins. My career is 22 years in university medical schools, like good university medical schools. I worked at the oncology center at Johns Hopkins, worked in the School of Medicine at the University of Virginia. So I got what it meant to be the daughter of a woman with breast cancer who was diagnosed at 60, which is not that old. And it wasn't like 40, but and so I said, I can't get this weight off. I need to do something else. So I decided to use a tool, and all of that went along with mindset changes. It went along with saying, I have to be worth going through this extremely invasive surgery that I will live with for the rest of my life. And at the same time, take care of myself, eat well, change my habits, change the way I look at myself in the mirror. I am 180, well, maybe 175 pounds down. I'm only 5'1.5", so I'm short. And 19 years later, I still walk past a window or a mirror and don't realize it's me. Right. Wow. So this is, so when we talk about body dysmorphia, those kind of things, it's real.
Yes.
But absolutely. The tools that I have put in my tool belt and developing my own personal lifestyle of intentional optimism and being willing to look at my core values. And like you said, I'm a speaker, trainer, coach. I'm a DISC consultant, understanding how I communicate. All of those things that I have walked through, I now turn around and I help other people with them, mostly leaders, mostly people who are interested in moving up or feel stuck. And my passion is to work with other women, but it's hard. It's not easy work. And we have to be willing to do it. Sometimes there are surgical tools that we can use, and then other times we just need to do the work on the inside.
If I can just rewind, as a non-Korean child in Korea in the 70s, especially with such a strong culture of conformism, of the outsider being stigmatized, that was a lot to handle back in the day.
Yes, but I will say this. In 1974, this was before Americans were not wanted there, right? This was still when Americans were very much still in like almost a savior mode, right? It's almost like the rescuers. It was, we lived very near Yonsei University, if anybody knows where that is. And later in my time there, I graduated in 1984. Later in the time, there were riots and that kind of stuff, kind of thing. And we did watch some of the American bases close, but for the most part, we were welcomed and we were revered. But I also was we had a very big expatriate community. I went to school with kids from 65 different countries. So that added to the mix, but it was a good mix. But I was never the skinny kid. I just wasn't that person. My family is genetically predisposed, hunter-gatherer kind of thing, to store energy.
Yeah.
And so I was the chubby kid always. And so it was hard to find clothes. It was, even though I'm short, you would think I should be able to find clothes, but it was hard. And so we literally, fortunately, there was a woman who would come sew for us and she would make me clothes. So it ended up being a weird thing where I had custom made things, but it was very much a conformist idea. And now I also am from, like I said, my parents are missionaries. So I'm also from the demographic of conservative evangelicalism in the South. And there's very much a conformity aspect to that as well.
Yes.
So I kind of got it from both sides. And, but as an example, my mother taught English because Korean women always wanted to learn English. And that was the way she did relationship building. And one of her students was a plastic surgeon, which I know you'll appreciate this. Yeah. She was a plastic surgeon in 1974, which is kind of a big deal for a woman. Yeah. And it wouldn't be now, but then it was. And my sister and my mother are both covered in freckles. And I mean, from head to toe, they almost run together in the summer, these freckles.
Yeah.
And this woman pulled my mother aside one day and said, "Samanim, you know, we can just lift that skin and scrape those freckles off." And my mom said, "No, why would you want to do that?" Like, my mother saw that as a beauty thing, right? And there was this conformity idea of, no, we're all supposed to look a certain way. And so, yeah, it was rough. There was a lot of conflicting messaging, a lot of dissonance for me. And I that's how I ended up soothing myself, or why I ended up soothing myself, because I just didn't have the tools to deal with it.
To frame it this way, there is still a much stronger stigma around mental health issues in Korea than in the States or other Western countries. I think it's a godsend that you were able to find a mental health institution with caring professionals who were able to guide you through that at that tender young age.
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. None of that happened in Korea.
Oh,
all of that happened when I was in college. I mean, I got the help I needed when I was in college in Texas. I was in Houston and Southeast Texas. So, I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. I suffered, and it's not just Korea where the mental health stigma is. Even in my family, there was a mental health stigma,
Sure.
And, we had family in this 12-week program, we had family therapy. And one day my mother came and said, "We do not air our dirty laundry in front of other people." And she got up to leave, and I thought I was never going to see her again, and that was never the case. That would never have happened. But, it's just those kinds of stigmas, they're still around. A lot of people still have them. And that affects everything. It affects how we see ourselves. But one of the things that I decided through getting through that process, and by the time I got married in 95, that was when I first started looking at my core values. And one of them is that I celebrate beauty in all things. And I said, and I have, are you familiar with Franklin Covey?
Franklin Covey? No, please.
Okay.
Please educate me.
Oh gosh, now I'm really dating myself. Okay. So way back when we all did these giant paper planners, the Franklin planner system was amazing. It was the best way to stay organized. And they had these little papers of this size or bigger ones. And you could get these leather bound binders and all these things that could help you. It's kind of like David Allen's getting things done and moving things from the next from today to tomorrow. That was one of the systems that I put in place in my life to help me figure things out and to grow and to be intentional about growing. And one of the things, Steve Covey, the leadership guy, actually bought out Franklin Systems, Franklin Planner, and it became Franklin Covey. And so I read his book. I believe it was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. I think it was that one. And at the end, there was this exercise of figuring out and writing down your governing values. And so this is mine from 1994. So it is, 30 years
30
old.
years.
Laminated with packing tape. Necessity is the mother of invention. With packing tape. But, one of my governing values was that I find beauty in all things, especially in people. And that was when I began looking for beauty in all people, because it's very easy for us to start thinking about whether or not someone is beautiful or not. And part of that process started in that hospital where I was wearing makeup all the time, and, your lipstick has to match and your shoes match your purse and all that junk, and very Southern. And one of the counselors said, I need you to not wear makeup for a whole week. I said, but my mom's coming. And she said, I know. I need you to not wear makeup. Okay. So I didn't wear makeup. My mother showed up and she looked at me and she said, you look different. I'm like, well, I'm not wearing any makeup. And she goes, Andrea, when I am not blind, I can see you're not wearing makeup. I mean, you seem different. And she noticed that I had a more settled, less performative demeanor. And so she actually noticed. So that was the beginning of me actually looking inside and saying, I can do this. I can be different. And, I'm not going to say it's always been easy. And I'm not going to say that I don't have days where I look in the mirror and go, gosh, I've never been a smoker, but it sure looks like I have all those smoker lines around my lips. Where did that come from? And I've learned things like I had gastric bypass and I've not had any surgeries to get rid of any of the skin. And I had one boss say to me, because I have like all of this, and she said, Andrea, those are your battle scars. Those are the things that show what you've been through. And I'm like, oh, so I think it's been a blessing for me to have other people help me see laugh lines as I've had a good life.
Yes.
It's like being able to have these lines here helps me see that I smile and I laugh and I give that to other people. That was, I know that's a big tangent on the whole mental health piece, but I think it matters.
Absolutely.
And working through those mental health things it's nice to hear that you can come out the other side.
Yeah. Obviously, there has to be a resolve from within to make the change to get to where you are now. But it's also great to have good help as well. And so some of the things that we say at our office is this beauty process is a journey, but it's already because you're beautiful that you're able to start this journey, and you have to acknowledge that for yourself. And so when you say that finding beauty in all things is one of your core values, that really resonates with me and with the message that I'm trying to put out there.
And, I think, Jay, too, the hardest thing is to see the beauty in ourselves. It's easy to look for beauty outside and to see beauty everywhere else. When I was in college, I finished up my college in Nashville, and I was a music business major. So I have a business administration with a concentration in music industry. And
Cool.
It sounds cooler than it is. And I only share that to say things like I was in Nashville. So I was on Music Row, and I worked for the guy who the school is now named after. But there were a lot of musicians. I went to school with people who you would recognize their names. And, and one guy plays saxophone, and he's not what I would consider an attractive person, but he is so fun and cool. And I just couldn't get him. He just seemed awkward around me. And so I asked my friend, I was like, what is the deal with this guy? And he goes, well, he said, pretty girls make him nervous. And I went, what? I mean, it didn't even, it didn't even occur to me. And he said, and on top of that, you're smart. And I'm like, wait, what? I mean, it's just, we don't give ourselves the credit that we need to. And so a lot of times the work that I do with people is helping them see that. And when we can see what our own core values are, we see how to honor them. We know how to set boundaries. We know how to stand up for ourselves and say, this is who I am, and I am good. And I am not interested in being something else for anybody else. Yes. But I also want to live that in a gracious way, because grace is always more beautiful. Kindness is always more beautiful. And my grandfather had a saying. He was a Southeast Texas construction worker. And he would say, pretty is as pretty does. And so that was the message that got passed down. And I wish I had heard it better when I was younger and didn't get caught up in all that. But it kind of comes back to resonate now.
Yes. And from what I'm gathering, it's as pretty does to others, but also how pretty does to yourself.
Absolutely.
Right? And this is a journey not for others' approval, but for you, for yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. I tell all of my clients, if they don't know this, what is the voice that you hear more often? Whose voice are you most familiar with? And some of them will say, oh, it's my mother's, or it's my husband, or it's my kids. I'm like, back it up. The voice that you hear the most often is yours. Is
your own.
How are you speaking to yourself? And when we understand, I literally have clients who say, oh my goodness, I am the biggest perpetrator of dishonoring my own core values. I'm like, that's right. We are, because we allow people to dishonor them. And when we get that message and we start saying, wait, and I love your beautiful, unique, and worth it, because that's literally what I say to people, is that if you don't bring what uniqueness that you've been created to display here, right? If a peacock didn't display their feathers, or a parrot didn't speak, or, a flamingo didn't do their dance, then we would be missing out. And I always tell people, your unique contribution to the table is the thing that we need. We all need to have each person's unique contribution. And you find that by looking inside. And I love that you tell people that you're worth it. It's because you are. I mean, the message there is that worth is something that is inherent. And, you said those are your three things. What I tell people is, it's not what you do that makes you valuable or an impactful leader. It's who you are. Yeah. And I think that's how we for sure overlap.
Yes. For me, some of my more recent messaging is around the idea that so much of how we try to size ourselves up with others is by what we do. And the idea that outside of what we do, just of inherently who we are, because we are human beings, we're individuals, we're beautiful people. That in itself is of value.
Absolutely. And, it doesn't really matter what culture you come from. We are all trained to perform. If you went to school, you were trained to perform. Yeah. You were not trained to think critically. You were not trained to, unless you went to Montessori or something through your whole school. But I mean, you weren't. My son, that was another journey of ours, is that I went into menopause at 37. And so my son I mentioned that he was born up there near where you are, is adopted, and he is now 15. But when we met with his, I think, first grade teacher, she told us, she said, when Nathan meets, when we do table work, Nathan kind of takes over. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, why would we stop that? I mean, yeah, he needs to give everybody else a chance, but this is natural leadership you're seeing here. This is not bossiness. I am not the mom who advocates that my son is never wrong. It's just, it's this automatic, we want people to fall in line with the status quo.
Yes.
And that's literally what I left my 22-year career in these lovely universities, because I said, I can't maintain the status quo. I need to help people break out of the status quo. I need to help people see that their uniqueness and their strengths are things that are a benefit to themselves and to others.
Yes.
And in order to do that, I have to be outside of that system. So, being willing to say, your uniqueness is what we need, is what I say every single day.
Yes. And like you said before, I think it's especially applicable to females, because there's more of a strong message out there in society of, oh, you have to have this role, you have to act this way. An assertive female is often described as bossy, where an assertive male is described in a nicer adjective.
Strong. Sure.
So, yeah. So I think that your work is especially relevant in today's day and age.
Yeah. And I love working with younger women because they see me as this, I don't know, aunt figure or mom figure who isn't their mom or relative, and being able to look at them and say, look, you don't need to be, in my world, you had to be 6'3", blonde hair, blue eyes with an MBA to be a leader. And that's just, I'll never be that at all, any of those things. And I want other women to understand. And so my podcast that I've done now for over 3 years, just recorded 183 episode. And
awesome.
the first couple of years, I did almost every other interview was with a woman that I considered to be a leader. And several of them I had requested they come on the show, and they did not think of ththemselves as leaders. And one of them was my son's kindergarten teacher who opened her own charcuterie side hustle. And she's still doing it. And I kept asking her, when are you going to take this full time? Oh, no, I couldn't do that. And she didn't see herself as a leader, but being able to ask specific questions and learn from women the things that they saw in themselves that they were displaying now, and looking back at their childhood and saying, oh, you know what? I displayed that as a kid, and being able to pull that forward and say, that's what you're finally doing. Many of them are on their second or third career, and learning from them and being able to put out for other women to say, hey, you may not think you're a leader, but I'm trying to give you examples of women that are leaders in every sense of the word that might look like you. I've got an actress in there. I've got, a franchise owner in there. I've got, all kinds of things, and people who just have a side hustle. One woman who started a school in Kenya to teach women how to sew, so that Maasai women, so that they would have a livelihood, right? So that they wouldn't get caught in the human trafficking trade. And so for me, being able to learn from those women and then turn around and say, yeah, this is why I want to do this, because every culture has something that we're telling our women, our young women, that they're supposed to do or look like or be in order to be successful. And I think we are at this pivot point in history that is, we are primed for women to just kind of really take off and fly, because it's kind of global. We do a lot of things like you and I are doing here virtually, and women are still struggling. But the more we train the younger women, the more I work with the younger women, the more I see the future as being very, very bright.
It reminds me of Beyonce's song, Girls.
Which one?
Who run the world? Girls.
Yeah. And it like I said, I come out of this Southern evangelical culture where women are not leaders, and it's very patriarchal. And what's funny is my husband, we will be married 30 years next May. And and that's an accomplishment, right?
Absolutely. Congratulations.
Thank you. We are not the typical, I am super strong. And he is like, Enneagram wise, he's like the 9 peacemaker, and I'm like the 6, out there doing things. And the very first church, when we met in seminary and married in seminary, I have nearly a master's of divinity. The very first church that he talked to, they called us, and this is back when we still had like one little phone, in the hallway. And so we had it on speaker, and they said, "We have a question for you. We need to know who wears the pants in the family."
Mm-hmm.
And I look back on that now and I can't believe we ever went there. And I can't believe that but that's how we ended up in Baltimore. And that's how my mom got to have breast cancer surgery at Johns Hopkins. And that's how we got my son, who was born in Fairfax, but was living outside of Baltimore. We got him at 9 weeks. So all of those things work together to show me that even through those things, those messages I was receiving, I was also receiving these other messages that are, no, there's something bigger for you. There's something bigger for you. And I want others to be able to see that.
I think that's a great message, that there's something bigger for you, because this is applicable to so many aspects of our life. But even in something as, let's say, not so deep as our beauty, there is something bigger for the person who decides to go on that beauty journey. And for you, I mean, there have been quite some big ups and downs in your life journey, and yet you've come out better on the other side, and you've come out more beautiful on the other side. So I think that's a great testament to you.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you. I'm just going to say thank you. Learning how to take a compliment, that's also hard for women.
It is.
Now live as an example.
Yeah. I tell my patients, I only take beautiful patients. And that's one of those things where I try to instill the idea of you are beautiful before you ever have any kind of professional beauty treatment, whether it's from me or from one of my staff. And the other thing that I tell them is I only treat young patients. And a lot of the times people ask, how old are you? But I'm not the one to ask how old you are, but I always ask, how young are you? Because it is about how you feel inside, how that beauty, that vibrance comes out in your gestalt.
Yeah, I love that.
So can you tell the audience about the premise of your podcast?
Yes, I mentioned the first couple of years of my podcast. One of the things that happened for me was I realized that I needed to start applying all that stuff I was learning. And because I'm a Maxwell trained leadership speaker, trainer, coach, and DISC consultant. And one of the things that Maxwell always says is experience is not the best teacher. Evaluated experience is the best teacher. So I have a rhythm of reflection that I do. And part of that rhythm of reflection is even, it's weekly, monthly, quarterly, and then at the end of the year. And so even with my podcast, when I started in August of 2020, I think. And so I'm coming up on 4 years. That's not 3.
Wow.
And going through that reflective process, I was like, I think it's time for me to make a change here. The brand needs to change. I need to be more, I need to be willing to share opinions, right? That's also something that women are not told to do. I was actually told by my mother, bless her, I love her. I miss her desperately, almost daily.
Yes.
But she unfortunately one day actually said to me, Andrea, not everybody wants to hear your opinion. And I have learned that people do want to hear my opinion. My clients want to hear my opinion. My listeners want to hear my opinion. And so part of kind of embracing all of that and honoring my core values, I decided to change the premise of the podcast. I don't do quite as many interviews. I do some, maybe one a month or every 6 weeks, but I do a lot of my own sharing and my own teaching. And the podcast is now called Stand Tall and Own It. Yes. And so the rebrand happened. Thank you. It's a little bit of a play. If you know me, most people look at me on a Zoom call or something like this and say, I would never have guessed you're only 5'1". I am. Do not let my size fool you. Because do not underestimate me, because there's a lot packed into 5'1". But part of the premise is you're told you're too much. You're told, but you're also told it's supposed to be safe for you to be big now. It's supposed to be safe for women to be able to be strong leaders and all these things. But it's not, right? It's still not. There's lip service toward it, but it's not real yet. And until more and more of us live up to just being ourselves. If that means I'm strong, if it means I am the one who makes the financial decisions and my husband is the one who does the dishes and makes sure my son does his homework, that works in our family. That's who
Yeah.
God created us to be. And standing and tall and owning whatever it is about us can be a very scary process. And the point of the podcast is to say, you're not alone.
Mhm.
There's plenty of other women out there. We just hit 10,000 downloads. And,
Wow.
so
Mhm.
there's plenty of other women out there. We work together, we link arms and we say, this is how we're going to do it. We are going to support each other. We're going to talk good about each other in other rooms when you're not there.
Yes.
We are going to lift each other up because we know that it's not a zero-sum game. And we only win when we all win. And
Yes.
if one person is down, then we need to be willing to say, wait a minute, the chain is broken. We have to pick it up. So Stand Tall and Own It is a place where you can learn, where you can be encouraged, and where you can hear some really fantastic interviews. And so I just actually interviewed my first man a couple weeks ago. It was quite the experience. I had never interviewed a man on my podcast. And so that one was really exciting. It was about ADHD and accepting neurodiversity as another aspect of our beauty and our superpowers. So there's a lot of good stuff coming up in the next month or so on the podcast.
Yes. There is so much there that I still want to unpack, but one of the big things about your Stand Tall and Own It podcast is that it encourages women to encourage each other. And there's enough patriarchal establishment kind of bearing down on you, but then if the people who are supposed to lift each other up are not doing that, then it makes it that much harder, right?
Yeah. It means that that ceiling that is there is real. Whereas if we're all pushing up on it, it's not real. It's not, it doesn't have to be there. And I love seeing the surprise on some people's faces when they realize their own authority and their own, I hate to use the word sovereignty, but sort of sovereignty. It's like, I have the ability to make those decisions for myself, and I'm not going to be available for that. And I'm not going to be available for that. But this is what I am available for. I'm all in, and being able to say, this is who I am, and I'm just going to stand tall and own it.
Yeah. It's about agency. It's about boundaries.
Yes.
It's about inherently staying true to yourself. And that's a great message. When you talked about ADHD, and I was just thinking of back to Korean dramas. It's not exactly ADHD, but, autism is a disability in itself. And if you remember the Extraordinary Attorney Woo, I don't know if you watched it. It's on Netflix. The main character is an attorney who has autism, and she graduates top of her class, and she goes into a law
From
firm
Seoul
and
National
kind of,
University.
yes.
That was my first. That was my very first Korean K-drama. And I said, oh my gosh, I'm totally hooked. And so that's what got me back in. But go ahead and finish telling the story, because your listeners need to hear this, y'all.
Yeah. And it's about somebody who is perceived as an outsider, somebody with autism, somebody who the established society would look down on. And yet there are obstacles in her way where, like, she is smart, but it's difficult for her to function as an outstanding attorney in that established context where, even her colleagues sometimes are kind of look at her funny for acting a certain way, or even some clients, they're like, are you sure this person with autism is going to represent me well? That sort of thing. So just to say that even, whatever kind of uniqueness we have, it can be a superpower. It can be something that we lean into and make the world a better place.
Yeah, absolutely. I said I grew up in Korea, but part of my abdicating my decision-making ability and things, I kind of, in order to assimilate into all the different places felt like I needed to, I kind of left that behind. And when I went there in third grade, Korean language was still part of the curriculum in our international school. So I learned a lot of it there. And now I'm back into like Duolingo and learning all kinds of stuff. But when my coach said, if you're not watching this show, you're missing out. I'm like, what is what is that? What is the Attorney Woo? And I said, oh my gosh, it's a K-drama. I had friends who were on K-dramas when I was in school. Like they were the Americans in the show,
Yes,
and,
yes.
but as soon as I started, I was like, I miss this culture. I miss these people. I miss the graciousness. I miss getting up for the harmony, the old lady or the grandma on the bus. I miss all those things. And I have to tell you, it was a healing thing for me to be able to look back and say, part of the incongruity is growing up in a culture like that is it's what we call third culture, because I was taught that I was American. I was very American. Everything I did was very American. I ate mostly American food, spoke English all day long, but I was in the Korean culture. So I'm not Korean. I'm not really American because I grew up in a different culture. So I'm a third culture. But starting to watch K-dramas has healed so much of the broken, fractured feeling of not belonging, because I realize I get to participate in both. I get both. And so now I have, I literally have a missionary kid friend just the other day. I have a document that I keep all the K-dramas that I watch. My sister, it's a Google Doc. She adds hers in. And so a friend of mine was like, I just started watching these. I'm like, I got you, girl. So it's like now I'm starting to share this Google Doc with my friends of all these K-dramas. So anybody out there, if you're interested in a list of great K-dramas, the ones that I've watched, I can tell you anything about them. I'm happy to share it. But it's a great way to shift your perspective. It is a great way to see a different culture and to see both how different it is, but how the same it is. I think it's a really good opportunity for us. Like my husband, I don't mind reading subtitles anymore. And so my husband's just—
I read them too.
Yeah. And like I said, I'm doing Duolingo so that I'm understanding even more. But my husband, we're even watching some shows with Spanish, lots of like half English, half Spanish language, so that he's starting to read subtitles. And we watch Shogun with subtitles. And so he's starting to get that. But now I'm just used to it, because my son's like, can you just not do the English version? I'm like, no, then you don't hear the tone. You don't hear the culture. You don't hear how they say, to each other. I mean, it's just hysterical. But sorry, you get me onto— clearly this is a passion of mine. But
that makes
you had no idea what you were doing when you did that. But it's all part of, like I say, I'm the intentional optimist. I have 6 tenets of intentional optimism. And one of them is being present and respect and understanding all the different perspectives. And it's not just being willing to see the beauty in ourselves. It is seeing beauty in each other and being willing to understand that I don't see it from your angle. And therefore I need to be willing to shift that perspective. So things like, it sounds silly, but watching K-dramas or La Tierra de la Mujeres on Apple, like the Land of the Women, is going to give you that opportunity to start seeing things from a different perspective, which might also help you understand yourself better.
I think there is so much value here in everything that you have to share, but really, regardless of the culture that these dramas come from, and of course, like you, I'm biased to Korean dramas as well. There is that cultural experience, but there's also the human experience that we all identify with. And with mental health, with beauty, just stepping out of the conventional messaging. I mean, we see conventional messaging here all the time. In terms of, oh, this person's beautiful, but I don't have that feature, or this person looks that way and they're popular, but I don't see myself that way. It's a great, what you champion is just a way to really filter out the noise and look in here to see what you have for yourself. And by realizing your own beauty, you can appreciate and champion the beauty of others.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One more K-drama. I'm actually watching one right now called Beauty Inside. Since you said that there's words together. And it's an interesting premise where this actress, who's beautiful, of course, she has a problem. At once a month, she changes into a different person. And so she has to learn to accept herself. If you haven't seen that one, it's quite, it's interesting. And all of the ideas of how we love and how we accept ourselves come into play there. And it's really,
Yes.
it's really cool. It's like one of those
Yeah.
that just gets you. You laugh one minute and cry the next.
Yeah, it's actually I actually started to read a book, and I would recommend it for you. It's by a Korean American lady named Jeannie Chang, and it's called How K-Dramas Transform Your Life.
Oh, I'm in. Is it on Audible?
I'm not sure if it's on Audible. I actually have the hard copy. I bought it off Amazon. But yeah, how it's good for self-care, how it's good for mental health, how it's good for healing yourself, your family, things like that.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah. So I had you fill out a little questionnaire before the show, and it said that you eat popcorn regularly. Can you tell me about?
I do.
Can you tell me about that?
Which is unusual for most gastric bypass patients are like, you can eat popcorn? I said, heck yeah, I eat a big bowl of popcorn. We have, because it's just my husband and me and my son, we thought we would adopt multiple children. And we didn't get my son until I was 42. And turns out that's how I learned about ADHD is it's kind of off the charts. So we learned a lot about ADHD, and I'm a working woman. And so it's just like, nope, one's going to be enough. Right. But we decided we would establish some family traditions. And one of them is family movie night. And we started doing this probably, I don't know, 5 or 6, 8 years ago. And so we watched like every kid's movie, every Disney movie, whatever. And for the longest time we picked, but the older he got, the more he wanted to pick. And then we would start arguing. Right. So finally we had to just put in a rotation system. And so it's like, I even told him this morning, hey, it's your pick for family movie night, which means I'm probably going to get subtitled Japanese Godzilla movie. But when growing up, the treat on Sunday night would be to pop some popcorn, and that would be my supper. And so when we started family movie night, I said, I just want popcorn for supper. And so I pop old fashioned popcorn. I put a little bit of Splenda and a little bit of salt on it. If you want a little bit of kettle corn flavor, and I eat that for supper. And so I managed to get in extra protein earlier in the day. And so tonight, that is my dinner. I'm having popcorn tonight.
I guess it's a healthier option than a lot of other things out there.
I think so. And what's funny is I was telling one woman this. I said, we do family movie night, and my son and my husband do microwave popcorn. No. I want the real stuff. I want it popped. Partially because I don't like that salty flavor. I don't like all that salt, but partially because it just tastes different when it's popped on the stove. And she said, there's no protein in popcorn. I said, au contraire. I said, there are 8 grams of protein in my bowl of popcorn.
Oh, wow, there you go.
You need to look it up. So yeah, and there's a lot of fiber in it. You can do it with, I don't add extra butter to it, but I do pop it in oil. And, when I'm actually tracking my food, which I do most of the time, but not all the time, I usually manage to keep my own diary with it. Even having a big bowl, it's a big IKEA bowl, man, a big IKEA bowl full of popcorn, I still manage to keep within like a 1,300 to 1,500 calorie day. And part of that's just because I've learned how to do it over time. Yes. And so it makes me happy, makes me very happy.
Actually, I'll probably go for some popcorn in the near future too.
Okay.
One thing I also wanted to ask you about is you had to undergo menopause at an earlier age. In terms of the emotional journey, in terms of coming out the other side and telling yourself that you are still beautiful, can you go over that a little bit?
Absolutely. This is something that a lot of women are starting to talk about now. But most of them are my age, and they're talking about it as if it's happening now. And I'm like, what do you mean? It happened to me like 20 years ago. At the time, well, my mother, like I said, had breast cancer. She also had a ruptured ovary. She had a prolapsed uterus. She had to have a hysterectomy when she was 36. So we don't know whether or not she would have gone into early menopause. But for me, I married at 27 and then couldn't get pregnant and had gastric bypass surgery and knew I needed to wait at least 18 months because your body's in starvation mode. So they don't want you to, you can get pregnant, but they don't want you to. And I got pregnant once and had a miscarriage very early.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you. And then really just kind of struggled. If you are someone who has ever struggled with infertility, it is a long journey and it is a difficult journey. But the other thing about my upbringing was adoption was everywhere. And
Right.
I mean, of the kids that were my age in our mission, two next door to me were both adopted. Another girl and her brother were adopted. My best friend was adopted. So adoption was very normal. Additionally, my family, Holt Adoption Agency has been working in Korea for years. And this is back when, now if you do an international adoption, you go overseas to the child and you stay in country for a while. But at the time, back in the 70s and 80s, you would wait in the United States and they would bring your child to you. And so Holt would partner with our missionary families to either foster these children before they went to the States, or we would call them adoption flights. And so our missionaries would go and be the guardian or whatever of a certain number of children and take them and meet somebody in Los Angeles, and the adoptive parents would meet in Los Angeles. And so my parents both did this at least twice, and for a very $200 ticket or something. Even back then, that was a really, really cheap ticket. Yeah. And because you only had to pay a part of it. But because of that, adoption was just part of the fabric of my life. And it never really occurred to me that I would adopt. But when we hit this place where I said, I'm 39, we need to talk to a fertility specialist. And this, I'm sure he's a very nice man. It did not come across well. But when this older gentleman in a white coat looked at me and said, you have about a 13% chance of conceiving and actually having a live birth, right? Even with in vitro fertilization. He said, your eggs are just old. I'm like, how are my eggs old? It's like, and he said, you are way early. So I think, truly menopause 42 is when I would say it happened. So it's considered early, but knowing that 38, 39, I think it's considered or premature. And there's a lot that goes along with that. I will tell you, it was almost harder for my husband than it was for me. And I think I look back at my life and say, adoption was part of the fabric of my life. It just was normal. And for him, it was not. And so by the time we got to the car, after hearing the 13% live birth option, I literally looked at him and I said, adoption's 100%. And so that began our journey. We were continuing to try, but that began our journey, and it was still almost 2 years before we actually had our son. But what's interesting is that those kinds of things seemed okay then, right? I wanted to be pregnant. I knew I wanted to be a mother. I didn't really, I don't understand. I look now and people are like, I don't have any idea what that's like. What's interesting is that things are coming up now that are more, I'm realizing I'm finally dealing with some menopause things now, because I thought, oh, well, hot flashes happened long ago. This happened long ago. I'm done with all that. But the reality is it actually stays with you, and postmenopausal things stay with you throughout your life. And as women, we deal with those kinds of things. You see, my hair is mostly gray, some really pretty white patches. I quit coloring it March of 23 just because I was tired, because it was gray long before then. And I said, I'm done with this,
I
and
like
there are
that
days
look on you.
Thank you. There are days when it's hard. I look at my face, I look at myself in the mirror and I think, you just look really old, girl. But I get compliments on it every day. So I'm learning to believe other people. But I think going through that early, there are things I don't regret not giving live birth. I don't regret not carrying a child. It's one of those things I look at now a little bit like the movie Alien and say, I just don't understand that. But I'm also a wimp when it comes to pain. But I've said for a long time, I got the baby without the difficulty. I just had different kinds of difficulties. And so now I'm looking at treating my body differently because I am postmenopausal. And 20 years ago, HRT was thought to be a causal agent in breast cancer. And so my mother was hormone positive. And so I didn't take any HRT, or I did for a little while. And my mother's oncologist, whom I worked with, just berated me in the hall one day. And, it's like, I know he meant well. I know he wanted me to be healthy and to not have to come see him for breast cancer. But there's a lot of information out there now. And so I have an appointment. I'm actually going to go talk to a midlife specialist because I'm still midlife, even though I went through menopause early. And it's just another one of those things, like mental health was something we used to not talk about. Menopause was something we used to not talk about. And now we're talking about it. And it affects everything. It affects our skin. It affects our eyes. It affects our hair. So I'm eager to start caring for my body better again. I already walk, I already lift weights, do those kinds of things. Cause I also have a history of osteoporosis in my family, but I'm interested to see how I can better care for my body and embrace her as beautiful through a more of a midlife view.
I mean, that's a very arduous, tough journey. And I'm glad that you have processed these changes and these life events to some degree,
we say
and are
we
still
process.
working.
It's always a work in progress.
Yeah. No, I agree. The beauty that we have in our 20s, in our 30s, is different than the beauty we have in later on in life. And I think that a lot of my older patients, they yearn for the beauty of their younger years in their 20s and 30s. And sometimes they come with inspirational photos of themselves from 20, 30 years ago. And that gives me an idea of, oh, this person wants to look like that again. Or this is what they found beautiful when they were 25, when they were 30. And now, even for my patients in their 50s and 60s, there is a semblance of that they long for, that nostalgia. And it was, you could say, an inherent part of their beauty growing up. And I love that patients can look back and say, this is an aspect of my beauty that I enjoyed. And it comes from that place of knowing that self-beauty and wanting to have a semblance of that again. Now, I always tell my patients, if you're 50 or 60, I can't make you look 20. I can't make you look like Barbie. But whatever you have in that picture, we can rewind to a semblance of that. And I think that a lot of patients embrace that concept of a different beauty, a more seasoned beauty, you might say, but it is equally beautiful in its own right.
It's interesting that you say that. I look at, like, when my mother died and my dad moved into an apartment, we downsized for him a lot. And I got my wedding portrait that my mom had hanging on the wall. So now it's in my bedroom and I'm not used to looking at that thing. And so I was looking at it recently and I thought, I don't know that I really considered myself beautiful then. And, I look at it and I think I have an interesting phenomenon too. My eyes have lightened throughout the years. They used to be a much darker brown. Now they're almost an amber. And, so I've talked to my eye doctor about it and she said, no, it's totally normal. It happens to people. But, what's funny is I now see things that are happening in my face that I saw in my mother. And I remember seeing her eyes as having, a lot of definition, in here in the, I don't know, not sunken, but she just had a lot of depth and a lot of, and she had I don't have her nose, my sister does, but, there were things about her. And that's one of the reasons I developed intentional optimism, because the things about her that I found so beautiful were the things of, how she could appreciate joy, and she could just, her eyes would just sparkle, just like you could see them. It was like almost this mischievous little thing. And, but I now look in the mirror and I'm like, oh, this is why it was hard to put eye makeup on my mom. I mean, it's like, literally it's the things that are happening. And what's funny is that I almost see it as more beautiful, as if I now can actually see some of my physical beauty that I didn't see before. And I think that comes with maturity.
Yes.
I think it comes with going through loss and appreciating, grieving some things and then appreciating certain things that we still have. I'm still learning to appreciate the beauty of the rest of my body. I actually had somebody I hadn't seen in a very long time. They're like, oh my gosh, I thought you were your mother. Now, my mother had bright blue eyes. So I'm thinking, evidently you're blind. But there are things, that's part of it is that there were so many things about her that we think are physical traits, but they're actually emotional or decision type things that come out in our physical beauty because of the way we position ourselves and because of the way we act. And like when she would see my son, she would just scrunch up her nose and get all excited. And, she would open the front door and she would go, and so that is, you don't think of beauty in that way, but those are the things that you remember about a person. So I think that with maturity does come seeing ourselves. And I like that, a seasoned beauty, seeing it differently. And I like that.
And it actually goes back to what you're saying earlier about beauty is as beauty does.
Yeah.
Which I love that
Not
phrase.
Paul. Yeah. As Southeast Texas construction worker, he knew what he was talking about.
That's right. I love that you have so much to share about your journey and what core values mean to you and your clients. Can you tell me about something else in your life where you find beauty?
I'm a gardener, and I don't mean like, I don't grow vegetables. I don't find vegetables pretty. And the birds eat them. I love perennials, and I have come to love, you can even see here succulents, on my wall. I have come to love the plants that weather all of it. I have come to love perennials, black-eyed Susans that pop up, hosta, lots of succulents, lots of sedum. I have a pool in the backyard, and that's what I have planted around there. And so I take the time. Yeah, I this year, because we were basically in a heat wave and a drought here on the east and mid-Atlantic coast, the deer are eating my hosta for the first time. But I learned so much from splitting this year in March and February. I split all of my hosta. I had so many, and I put them all around my house, and the deer are eating them this year. But before they did, they just were so beautiful. And I see in that, I learned lessons from that of we need space in our roots. We need to give ourselves space to grow. We need to be willing to grow. I have one hosta that, had leaves about, regular size or something. But when I split that thing and I planted it in 4 different places, they came back as dinner plate leaves. I mean, they were huge. I'd never seen anything like it. And my best friend goes, yeah, their roots just needed a little bit of space. They needed more oxygen, more energy. And I think it's just I like to get lessons out of anything that I can. And so for me, I find beauty in the greenery and the flowers, and even just, I have pots on my deck, and I have creeping Jenny in one that just keeps coming back and coming back. And it's this lovely chartreuse green, little bitty round leaves, and just kind of flows. And somehow in weeding, I toss some over the rail. Well, now I have a patch of creeping Jenny in my grass on the outside of down by my deck. And so just seeing the contrast of the dark green grass and the bright chartreuse, it doesn't get cut with the lawnmower because it's really low, but I love seeing the beauty in all of those things. And then just kind of saying, yep, everybody, we're all unique. We all learn from we learn from all of those things. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because my dad actually studied horticulture. And so he actually got his master's at Penn State. So we lived in State College for a while, and I wouldn't know the first thing about what he learned or what he studied, but I'm sure he would appreciate your gardening.
Well, and like I said, I like the things that stick around. I don't want to have to water them. I don't want to have to plant. I don't plant annuals. So I don't plant the things that come back. I have to plant each year. I plant the things that I can put here and know that they're going to be bigger next year and bigger next year and bigger next year. Because I like to watch everything die down in the winter. And this is part of my appreciation of wonder, and know that they're waiting and waiting and waiting, and then watch them pop up through the soil, knowing that they have some kind of internal clock that tells them it's time to come out. It's spring. And so I know which ones pop up first, and I cannot wait to see the crocus and the tulips and the daffodils pop up first. And then I have stuff that lasts throughout the whole summer. And it brings me a lot of joy to be reminded that they go through it they die off every winter, and it's barren looking in my garden. And then they all just come right back up, and it's beautiful.
I bet that's a really wonderful sight to see. If somebody were interested in working with you as a client, let's say a young female on the up and up, trying to conquer the world, how would they get in touch with you and start working with you?
Oh, that's like the easy question. I should have just answered, please work with me. I would love to work with you. I have coaching programs. I have my podcast, but one of the easiest ways to figure out if you want to work with me or not is if you just go to my website, theintentionaloptimist.com. Right above my head, one of the buttons there says free core values exercise. And it's a download that helps you start your journey of looking inside to see what your non-negotiables are. From there, we can go any direction you'd like to. I do have a new membership that is called Empowered Leaders. I haven't actually put it on my website yet, but we do masterminds, we do book clubs, we do monthly meetings. And I also, if you're in the area, I have a conference coming up in October, a leadership conference. And it's also on my website, but that is the best place to get in touch with me. I will answer DMs on LinkedIn and Instagram at The Intentional Optimist for both of them. Tell me that you heard me and heard me tell you this on Jay's show here so that I'll know you're not spam, and I'll respond because I'm a solopreneur. I respond to all of my own stuff.
That is wonderful. So I had a lovely time talking with Andrea Johnson about her life, how she finds beauty in her life, and how she impacts the world by empowering women to embrace their own beauty. We're going to leave the links to her free core value resource in the description, as well as her website and a link to her podcast, Stand Tall and Own It. I appreciate so much, Andrea, your spending time with me on this episode of the You're Beautiful podcast with J. Kim MD.
Thank you. It has been my pleasure. 감사합니다.
감사합니다.